Hello from Cork.
Hello from New York.
It's Misha Moira Shanachie Corky. It's Maria, the Cork-based storyteller.
It's me, Jim, here in Fayetteville, New York.
We can't wait to tell you a few stories. Well, the interesting people that you meet on the story road, it's only marvellous, isn't it, Jim?
It certainly is. It certainly is.
Tucked in between Maria and Jim today, we have another Maria. It's such a beautiful name, and I think it's a name that suits storytellers very well. So, Maria Credali, how are you?
I am good. It's great to be here. Thanks for inviting me along.
It's great to have you here, you know. And I suppose we have to go back to the World Storytelling Cafe and say that we've all met on those hallowed roads. So, Maria, you haven't met Jim in person yet, but I'm sure you will. But you and I, we had a little dance there in the World Storytelling Cafe for the International Storytelling Festival in Marrakesh, didn't we?
We did. It was so lovely to meet everybody after all those months and months of seeing each other in little boxes on Zoom meetings. And then we all just got to meet in the flesh. It was wonderful, actually. Yeah. It was the start of a lot of really lovely friendships, that was.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, and I'm looking forward to going back very shortly now. We've been in my residency with Finoog in Sheehan Storytelling Cottage. We started this project called Story Bridges. And so Omar Bellaraj came over from Marrakesh last year, and I'm going back this year, but we're actually extending the bridge. So the bridge is now going to New York, Jim, isn't it as well?
It is. It is. And Marrakesh has really been one of the centers of that, because that's where you and I met face to face for the first time. But yeah, we'll be going back for about a week in April, and traveling around in the country, even up into the Atlas Mountains to do some storytelling with the Amazigh people there. So very, very excited about that.
Very excited.
That sounds wonderful.
You know, and of course, we've had, we haven't formalized them, but we've had lovely Mad for Road story bridges in our story homes, Maria. So we were over in Lichfield only very recently, and Birmingham as well, where I was born, you know. So Maria, have you a little story to start us off today?
I have. I thought I would start with, this is one of my absolute most favourite stories, and I love this one because it speaks to everyone. Long, long ago, in a time before, well, taps and plumbing, where you couldn't just turn the tap on and get your glass of water, and you couldn't just hop in the shower, there lived a man, and this man's job was to carry water. And he worked in a house on the top of the hill, and every day he would pick up 2 heavy clay jars, clay pots, and he would put them on either end of a stick which he carried across his shoulders, and he would begin to walk down the hill. And it was a long, winding and dusty path, and it went from the house on the top of the hill all the way down into the cool and the shade of the river at the bottom of the valley. And there he would sit and he would relax. He would listen to the frogs singing and the birds tweeting, and he would watch the dragonflies zip across the surface of the water and just, calm. And he would take these pots from off his shoulder and take them over to the river, and he would fill them up with water, hoist them back onto his shoulders. They were heavy now, and he'd begin to walk back up that long, winding, dusty path to the house on the top of the hill. Well, he had to do this job maybe 5 or 6 times a day, carrying the water from the river to the house. He was very happy in his work, and you'd often hear him singing or whistling. Time went on, and one afternoon, and we don't really know how this happened, but one of those pots developed a crack. And now, every time he was walking back from the river to the house, that pot, well, it would drip, drip, drip. By the time he got back to the house on the top, there was only half a pot of water left. But he didn't mind. It didn't seem to bother him one bit. But do you know who it did bother? The perfect pot. The pot with no cracks in it at all. The most beautiful, perfect whole pot. Well, she began to mutter and whine. And she would say things like, "What are you doing with that pot? That pot's a load of rubbish. Look at it. It can't even do its job anymore. By the time you've got back up to the house at the top, there's only half of the water left. Why don't you get rid of it? It's useless. Get rid of it. Get another perfect pot like me." Well, the man listened, but he didn't say very much. He doesn't say very much in the story, this man. But you know what? That poor cracked pot, it had to listen to that every day. Day in and day out, it had to listen to somebody talking about how useless it was, how it was rubbish, how it couldn't do its job anymore. In fact, how it was making everyone else's life hard. And that poor cracked pot became more and more sad. And it realised that, no, it couldn't do its job anymore. And it wasn't as good as it used to be. And it tried so hard to pull itself back together to close that crack, but it couldn't seem to manage it. And as the days turned into weeks and the weeks turned into months, that poor cracked pot became so despondent that one afternoon when they were down by the river, listening to the birds sing, watching the dragonflies zip across the water, it finally spoke up. And in a quiet voice, it said to the man, "I know we've been together such a long time, and I've loved working with you. But I've realised that I can't do my job anymore. And I know I'm making your life harder. And maybe it's time for us to part. I think perhaps you should leave me behind and get yourself a better pot, a pot that can carry all the water for you, that's not going to make your life harder. Maybe it's time. Maybe you'd be better off without me." Well, the man said nothing again, but he just went over to the river and he filled up both of the pots with water and he put them on either end of that pole and he hoisted them onto his shoulders and they began the walk up the long, winding, dusty path to the house on the top of the hill. And as they walked along, that poor cracked pot, it just dripped, dripped, dripped all the way up the hill. And as they swayed with the motion of the man's steps, the man quietly said to the perfect pot, "Look down and tell me what you see on your side of the path." And the perfect pot, "Why?" "Just tell me," said the man. And the perfect pot looked down. "Well, there's nothing, is there? It's too dusty, too dry for anything to grow. Why are you asking me this?" And the man very quietly said to the poor cracked pot, "Look down. Tell me, what do you see on your side of the path?" And the cracked pot looked down, and all the way up his side of the path, there grew wild flowers.
Absolutely beautiful. What did you think of that, Jim?
Oh, beautiful.
Yeah.
Oh, what a beautiful story. And so very, very sweetly told. Thank you. Thank you.
I think it's such an important story to share for all ages, actually. It's really interesting. That one works right across the ages from little children to adults. And there's that, I don't explain why the flowers grew. I don't explain about the watering. We kind of like, if it's families with small children who are listening, that's a lovely conversation they can have afterwards.
Yes.
It just works on lots of different levels. So I do two main types of storytelling. I'll do shows, which are adult shows, which always sounds a bit dodgy, doesn't it? But shows for adults.
That's right.
And I do family storytelling. And when I have family storytelling, you never know who's going to walk in through the door. Sometimes it's teenage girls who are all, very body conscious. So that's a lovely one for them. Yeah. Sometimes it's a family and the dad looks absolutely exhausted and, this is a story about somebody who thinks maybe they're not worth what they once were. And it's the perfect tale. It is.
I've just had the benefit of some of Maria's workshop work as well, which is quite amazing. So not only does she do different shows for storytellers, but my lovely friend from the Mad for Road Tellers also does different kind of workshops. So she does workshops for people who are only beginning their storytelling journey, and then she gathered all of the really experienced storytellers from the Mad for Road group that come from all over the UK and all over the island of Ireland, and we looked at putting shows together. And one of the shows that Maria did that really stands out for me is 7 Years a Wolf, which has some beautiful stories and a lovely scape, and it hangs on Maria's very unique rhythmic telling. So I just wanted to mention those things as well. Maria, maybe you'd tell us a little bit about 7 Years a Wolf and where people can find you if they'd like to learn more on their storytelling journey.
Yeah, sure. So, well, firstly, this 7 Years a Wolf story, it was the first full-length show that I ever put together, and it happened during lockdown. I was invited by Alistair from Surrey Storytellers to put together a full-length show, and I'd done a little story from this tale, but I'd never done a full-length hour-long story, and it's such an epic tale. So the original story is a medieval story. It's by Marie de France. Did you like that French accent there? Marie de France. And she'd made this beautiful set. Très belle. And she'd made this beautiful set of lay, and it had all of these tales woven through it. And one of the stories, it's called different things. Sometimes it's called Bisclavret, which is a kind of a werewolfy story. But it's not really a werewolf story. It's a story about a knight who is changed into a wolf. Guess how long he's changed for? You can tell.
Would it be 7 years?
It'd be 7 years, yes. So he's changed into a wolf for 7 years. It does exactly what it says on the tin. I've taken kind of about 5 chapters from this story and woven them into a lovely medley. And there's a beginning, a middle, and an end, and it just works really nicely. Really, the crux of it is how we can manage to find a way to go on when circumstances are really difficult. So this man who's been a knight, who has been very well respected, he's very well off. He's been off on the campaigns. He's served his king and country. He's come back and he's had it all snatched away from him. He's been betrayed. And I'm not giving too much of a spoiler away if I tell you that it was his wife. His wife cursed him. I know. And he ended up transformed into an animal. So he's back down to the absolute bare bones of who he is as a person. And it's about how he rebuilds his sense of self and finds a purpose to life, and his ultimate purpose that he's always known and he comes back to is his purpose is to serve. So he finds a way to serve his people again, and it's just such an inspirational story. It gets quite black, gets quite dark, there's a lot of despair, and then you can see him spiraling up again, finding things to live for, and it's such an inspirational story. And it's grown in the telling as well. So when it started, it was because it was on Zoom, there wasn't much interaction or anything. And the more and more I've told it, the more I've worked out how to get the audience more invested and more engaged and to kind of help me tell the story. So it's lovely watching it grow. It's very rich. And it's got such a satisfying, feel-good ending to it. It's lovely.
Oh. You know, the communicating of stories and how we connect across space and across time when we're telling the stories is absolutely, it defies explanation. It's just magic. It's magical, you know. But also the imparting of that knowledge to people, you know, because I think we're born storytellers and then it's kind of trained out of us. So when we start to, like, one of my favourite things to do as a storyteller is to bring people on in their story, you know. So I do the threading and weaving and tell the story that was never told at the festivals, and the audience are so electrified. We made that is often what they would say. And I know that you have this lovely way about you, Maria, as well, of bringing the stories out of people, the stories that are already there.
Yeah, it's lovely watching people figuring out that they can share what's going on inside them. You know, it's right, because there's something more, there is more to storytelling than telling the story, isn't there, really?
Sure is, yeah.
And I think when the best stories tellers are like the best artists, there's part of themselves in the story, and what you're seeing when you listen to the tale is not just the story, you're seeing a little part of somebody's soul, really.
Yeah.
Or maybe I share too much. I might be oversharing at this point.
Never. You're a resonator, you know, you resonate with people. So, yeah.
That's very much how I feel about it, is that it's an opportunity to open up and for people to share. Because the stories touch on the common themes that we all care about, don't they?
Yeah, you know, so
I'd like to jump in with a story that's inspired, Maria, by yours. It's a different story entirely, but it involves Morocco. So, you know, I want to involve Morocco. And it's set in what they now call Aswara, but in its day it was called Mogador, which is off on the western side of Morocco. This is a Jewish story. It happens to take place at Passover, which is in our world right now coming up pretty soon. And there was this great rabbi, his name was Rabbi Pinto, and he did something that everyone is supposed to do, but he did it with real feeling, and that was invite anyone who wanted to come to the Passover dinner, to the Seder. That's one of the commandments. And he would have his disciples go out and find people who needed a place to have the Passover Seder and invite them to his table. That was a big thing that he did. So this one Passover, his disciples were scouring the city looking for somebody who needed a meal. And they found this one guy who obviously was in need, looked terribly depressed, just very, very downhearted. And they knew he was Jewish, so they said, please, would you come to our Seder? And he said, no, I know you have a good time at Seders, but this is the worst time of the year for me. I can't possibly come. And they tried to convince him, but he wouldn't come. So they finally went back to the rabbi and they said, well, there's this one guy, we couldn't get him to come, but we got others. And the rabbi looked at him and he said, you've got to bring this fellow. You've got to bring this fellow. And if he won't come, whisper this word in his ear and he'll come. So they went back and they found him again, you know, sitting on the edge of a fountain, his clothes all torn, just in terrible shape. And he said no again, but one of the disciples whispered this word in his ear. And he stood up and he said, how is it that you know the name of the ship that brought me my misfortune? And they said, well, the rabbi would love to tell you, come to our Seder. So they came to the Seder and he greeted the rabbi and he said, how did you know that name? What's going on? And the rabbi said, sit. You'll learn over the dinner. And so they started to have the dinner. But as they were getting started, the rabbi said to the man, please tell your story. And so he did. He said, I was born in Marrakesh. And I was very successful in my business. And I moved to Spain. And I just built a tremendous amount of wealth. And I was living a very comfortable life. And I decided it was time to come home to Morocco and rejoin my family and my people. And so I sold everything I had. I bought precious jewels to carry back with me. And as I was getting ready to return, an old widow came to me and said, my granddaughter lives in Morocco. Would you please take these jewels to her? These are her legacy. And he said, of course. So he took her jewels and got on the ship with his jewels, and they started sailing towards Morocco. Now, anybody who knows a story, a folktale about ships, knows the ship is going to sink. And that's exactly what happened. On his way back, the ship sank. Everything was lost. All the jewels went to the bottom of the sea. And somehow he made his way to the port. And of all the things that bothered him was the fact that he wouldn't be able to fulfill his vow to this old widow. He really felt terrible about that. And as he finished telling the tale to the rabbi, everyone in the room was heartbroken for him, especially this young woman who was sitting down at the other end of the table and just weeping. And the rabbi said, "Hold on now." And he took the cup of Elijah, which is a cup that is used at the Seder that nobody drinks from. It's a wine cup, and everybody holds it in hopes that Elijah will come to visit. And he put it in the center of the table, and he spoke some magic words. And the cup began to grow. And it grew wider and wider until it was so wide that you could see waves of wine in the top of the cup. And the rabbi called out to the Lord of the ocean, Rahab, to release what he had stolen. And up into the center of the cup bobbed this chest. And the man recognized it at once, and he reached in and he grabbed it and he pulled it out. And immediately the cup began to shrink. And now he's got this huge chest next to him. He recognized it was the widow's jewels. And he didn't know what to say. But thank you. How did you make this happen? And the rabbi said, "Well, the story's not over yet." And he looked down the table, and there was this young woman who had been weeping so heavily. And the rabbi said, "Here is the granddaughter to whom you promised to deliver these jewels. You can give them to her now." And they opened the chest, and there were her jewels. And the two of them, well, they became at least fast friends, if not more. And that's the story of the magic wine cup.
Wow.
Oh, I could see that. That's a picture. That's going to be a painting or something, that is.
Yeah.
That's beautiful.
Very visual, you know. And it reminded me of one of my favourite things from Harry Potter, which was that room that provided anything you wanted. You know that room? So it was like that cup with the sea of wine. Jim, my Irish heart is smiling. A sea of wine with waves, Jim. And treasure chests. Oh my goodness, I loved it. So...
And as you didn't explain your story, Maria. For me, one of the things that sits beneath that story is that is not so much the miracle, but that when we are so despondent and have had true loss, true reasons for grief, they can't be solved by isolating ourselves. We have to find our way back to a community. And that's where the miracles happen sooner or later. So,
And one of those very ordinary miracles is the bringing together of two hearts.
Yeah.
You know, so beautiful. Yeah. You know. Okay. So we talk often, Maria, about the red thread of story. And so as we're listening to one another, of course, your own little story children are knocking on the corners of your mind going, "Oh, that reminds me of me. Tell me next. Tell me," you know. So I have a little story, and it comes from my corner of the world, and I'd love to tell it to you. It's called Nancy May, and it's about the fairy midwife. And I've heard it told all over the place. But to me, when I was growing up, my connection to this story is my mother used to tell it, you know. So I love her version because of it. And her name in this story is Nancy May. So when I started traveling as a storyteller and I'd hear the story back, her name wasn't Nancy May. So I think this is our little version of that story, the Cork version of that story. But I know it's told in many different places, just like the cracked pot, So, and here's the story. Once upon a time, when Ireland was new, when she was learning her way, we put the men in charge. And sometimes that just doesn't suit the women. They made all sorts of rules and regulations that kind of upset the processes and the way we went about our days. Chief amongst these was they put a law in place saying that the women now had to have a doctor attend them at the birth of a child. This was in the days when there was 9, 10, 11 children could be born to a woman. That meant 10, 11, 12 shining shillings that would have to go into the paw of the doctor. And, that could be the child's first milk. That could be the meat that needed to feed the mother so that she could feed her child. So the women came up with a workaround. Did you ever hear of a workaround? They looked and they saw that the doctor did not like getting out of his bed between the hours of, say, 3 o'clock in the morning and 7 o'clock in the morning, when the hollow of your bed is at its coziest, when you really don't want to go out into the rain. So because the doctor wouldn't come or couldn't come between those hours, you will see from the Irish census that most children, and I'm winking here, were born between the hours of 3 o'clock and 7 o'clock in the morning. And at that time, they could have the midwife. Now, the midwife, she moved to the same rhythm of the women. The midwife could be paid with a chicken or some milk from a goat, because not always did they have the currency to pay the woman. And she was known as the gatekeeper of souls, because you see, she saw the children into the world with her strong, sure, gentle hands. But she also washed the bodies, getting you ready to meet your maker. And she knew exactly where to put her steady hand between your shoulder blades in that moment when you needed most comfort. One of the lovely women, the midwives, who had this job in Cork was known as Nancy May, and she was as neat as a new pin. She had a little bun at the back of her head, and she'd wear the black shawl of Cork over her shoulders, and she'd carry a basket under her arm with all her accoutrements, everything that she would need to give the woman comfort and help during those 2 difficult times in life. One night, in the middle of the night, there was a knocking at the door. She jumped up out of the bed, pulled on her voluminous black skirt, had the shawl over her shoulders, and as she was going down the stairs, she was saying to herself, is that the Murphy child now? Is that the Sullivan child? Is that the Gillen child? Who now is due to give birth? And as she went through it all in her head, she hoped that no mother was calling her in the middle of the night in order to help with a birth, because nobody was ready. And therefore was somebody calling her to wash a body. And if they were, couldn't they have waited until morning? And it was with thoughts like this running through her head that she opened the door. When she saw the handsome man outside that door, she got what is known in Cork as a stoppage. It looks something like this. because he was the most handsome man she had ever seen in her life. He was 6 foot tall, with hair as black as ink. His eyes were deep and blue, and you could fall into them like two beautiful pools. And his face was moon white without a blemish. It looked as if he was carved out of marble. And he kind of put his hand in through the doorway and said, "Nancy, come now, the woman has need of you." She stepped out onto the cobblestones and she clicked the door closed behind her. And it was only then that she realised she'd never asked him a question. She did not know the seed nor the breed of him. She'd never set eyes on him before, and now she was out in the street and it was too late to go back in. It was then she noticed. It was then she noticed the perfect silence. The Shandini, the old people, they have a knowing, and they would say when there's a perfect silence that you don't have your foot in this world, nor you don't have it in the other world either. But you are in the idder. You're in the in-between. Every hair on her head stood up, but she followed him up the cobbled streets of Cork, noticing that there was no man singing, no bird's wing flapping, not a moth, not a breath of air. And the moon hung low over the North Chapel, as if it would touch the spire. She sat up into the beautiful carriage and she noticed that there wasn't a nail nor a screw nor a bit of glue in it. She was the daughter of a carpenter like myself, and it looked as if it had been carved out of one gigantic piece of wood. But where would you get a tree that big on this little island? She sat up into the carriage and he clicked at the horses that stood as if to attention, nose by nose. And they turned now in that narrow street as if they were turning on a sixpence. And as they took off down the cobbled streets of Cork, no noise was made by the big cart wheels on the cobblestones. They turned up Sun Valley Drive. They turned right out towards the Black Stone Bridge. No person in Cork would willingly go to the Black Stone Bridge at that bewitching hour, for they all knew the old stories. Her heart was racing, and he began to make the horse go faster and faster. "Brustig," he said, "go faster." And they clicked and they clicked and they clicked, and she put her hands up in front of her face, thinking they surely would crash into the little hillock. But when she took her hands down, she realised they were inside the mountain. She did not know how it had happened, but as she looked around, the people here were all one more beautiful than the other. This beautiful stranger didn't stand out here at all. And then she heard it, the screams of the woman. She jumped down off of the carriage as her midwifery practice took hold of her body. She found that woman by the noises that she made. 3 times that night, she turned the baby in the belly of the woman. 3 times that night, she thought she would lose the woman and child too. But as dawn broke, the little child was born. She washed the baby down. She kissed it on its forehead. She wrapped it in the swaddles and she put it on the breast of the mother, as she had done so many hundreds of times before in the city of Cork. It was then that the man came back into view. He stood between her and the woman. "Thank you, Nancy May, for your good work," he said, with his face earnest. "But now I will give you 3 bits of advice. Will ya indeed, she said. And will ya? I will, he said. And the first bit of advice is tell no one that you have come here. And of course I won't be telling people, she said. Who'd believe me? Good, he said. And the second thing, he said, is that you will need to keep your hand in your lap as you leave this place. Okay, so, she said, and who are you, might I ask, finding her voice? And he said to her, better for you that you don't know my name. She took a step back then. All right, so, she said, that's fine then. Also, he said, take nothing from here that you are not offered. As if I would do that, she said, in this holy season of Lent. Sure, that's a mortaler. That's a mortal sin. That's like stealing. Good, he said. So we're agreed then. We are agreed, she said, sitting up on the carriage once more. That's when he produced the beautiful purse. She couldn't see a seam in it, and it was made of the softest leather. You'd just like to hold it in your hand. And when she opened it up, twinkling in there, she saw the gold and the silver. She tied the purse up and she put it in a safe place where they wouldn't look for it. And he sat up on the carriage beside her and began to crack the whip. It was then she saw them. She saw them flying in from all different places. People like him who had been out in her Cork city through the night and now they were coming home to rest. As they came in through the hole, they were sticking their fingers into this font of water and touching their eyes. And her, being a good Catholic, a daily communicant all her life, forgot everything that the man had told her as her hand rose up and her fingers dipped into that water. Well, no, she couldn't bless herself with it. So what was she to do with the water? She saw that they were touching their eyes, so she put the water to her own eye. Well, that did nothing, she said. That did nothing at all. I'm wondering why they're doing that. And that was the last thought she had as they went back down towards Sun Valley Drive, turned right up towards the Shandon and the North Chapel onto Gerald Griffin Street where she lived. As she alighted outside her own front door, her neighbours began to get up for work. Nancy May, girl, and have you been away on holiday? You look so refreshed. And then she thought to herself that even though she'd been up all night, she felt as fresh as a child. She ran out into the back and she saw that her herbs there looked more succulent, as if somebody had been feeding them. She quickly plucked a handful and went to the chickens, who, where they had laid one egg, now laid two. And the goat had so much milk that she was able to keep some milk to give to her neighbours. Now for a while she didn't move from her house. No need, with all these new riches from nature. But you know, and I know, that it's really nice to spend your money every now and again. And she began to dream of a red cow that would give creamy milk, a red cow that would sing to her sometimes in the field out the back of her house. And she put on her shawl and she headed down Shandon Street and across the bridge to the coal quay of Cork City. Now Maria has been to Cork City and Jim will be coming soon. And I'll be showing them this little square that's across from TK Maxx in the coal quay of Cork City. In those days, it was a market. There was goats and sheep and cattle sold there. There was geese and chickens and all kinds of vegetables sold in that place. And as she came into the square, she saw the red cow that she'd been dreaming of in her head. She hung over its back to test its strength. She inspected it from the tip of the tail to the tip of its nose, and then she was gearing up to employ herself in the national sport of bargaining. When who did she see but the woman with her baby? And as she looked at the woman, she said, "How are you, girl? And how's your bonny baby?" And the woman looked at her in shock and began to float backwards between the crowd out onto the street of the cold quay of Cork City. And she followed her because she couldn't bear bad manners. I said, "Hello, girl. How are you? And how's the bonny baby?" The woman looked at her again. And it was at that time that the people of Cork City said that Nancy May began talking to herself. Nancy said that the woman replied, "Can you see me?" "Of course I can see you," she said. "Aren't I asking you about your baby?" The woman said to her then, "Did you take something from our place, something that you were not offered?" "Indeed I did not," she said, because she was honest as the day was long. "I took nothing from your place. Sure, that's stealing." Right then she said, "Did you keep your hand on your lap as you left our place?" "I did," she said, and then she went, "No, wait a minute. No, my fingers went into the font." And she said, "And what did you do then?" She said, "I touched my eye like everybody else was doing." "Which eye did you touch?" "This one," she said. "And the other?" "No, I never put the water near that one." The woman held up her hand and walked towards Nancy May. And Nancy May will always say that that was the last thing that she ever saw. For the blood began to pour between her fingers as she fell to the ground. The good people of Cork picked Nancy May up. They brought her to the North Infirmary Hospital, and there they patched her eye as best they could. Soon a skin grew over that empty socket, and Nancy May began to wear her hair over her face. She got a shake in her hand, and nobody wanted that woman with the shaky hand to help them give birth, or to put that shaky hand between their shoulder blades when they felt their worst grief. But the women of Cork, they never forgot her kindnesses. They would put a plate of sandwiches and a bowl of soup on a little table outside their gardens for Nancy May. And they would say to the children, "Go and sit with Nancy May. She'll tell you all about the she. She'll tell you how to avoid the fairies." And we didn't want to sit with that strange woman. But I'm glad I did. And I'm glad I have this story to tell you. Sin é mo scéal, that is my story.
Gorgeous story.
Gorgeous.
I love listening to you tell that story.
Thanks, Maria. You know, I love that story too, and there's a lot of eating and drinking in it. And like you two, the red thread of story for me today is that I wouldn't explain that story. And I love that I have heard that story from a child and that it means different things to me at different times in my life. Is that true for you guys as well?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Much,
you know.
I remember when we were in Cork on the Mad for Road trip, you took us to the steps and said that's where she had her eye taken away from her.
Yeah.
I remember the shiver going down my spine then.
That's it, you know. And I remember my mom walking us through Cork and she'd be like, "Oh, this street is very haunted. That's where Nancy May went up in the carriage." And you'd be like, "Oh my God." And that was the road that led up to my granny's house, you know. So you're like, "Oh my God," you know. So, and I live about a 10-minute walk up the hill from where all of that is supposed to have occurred, you know. So, yeah. So I don't really know where the story came from. It's always been a Cork story for me, you know, and it's embedded in the stones of my people. Like, I know exactly where her little house was, you know, how she shined her knocker and washed her step, you know, and how she was as neat as a new pin, and the type of bun even that she had, which is amazing. I'm also conscious that it's our first time of having a guest, and there's a beautiful story that I'd love to hear from you, Maria. And it's the story of Eileen and her fisherman. Do you have that story tucked under your tongue anywhere?
Just before you do, and I hope I'm not telling someone that Santa Claus isn't real. But that is a story I learned a long time ago, set in Dakar, Senegal.
Mm-hmm.
And it's about the midwife who visits the jinn. And it's very much the same story, except that what happens to her in the end is she finds a bag of jewels on her kitchen table because she does return home without touching anything or eating anything. And that bag is never empty. So she cares for the neighborhood from that point forward. So it's a different, a different twist to it, but the same story, absolutely the same story.
That's it. Like, ours was a stark warning, and that one was like, you know, kind of feed your neighbors.
That's right. Yeah,
but in both stories, the women kind of looked after one another,
absolutely,
which I love as well.
Yeah,
because in the Nancy May story, the women never forgot her kindnesses, and they fed her. So I love that too.
Yeah. I was just going to say, relevant to that, actually, I was reading something the other day about how stories end up being stories of place, and it was talking about the necessity to help people to remember the story. If you're sharing a story on and on, the easiest way to get people to remember it is to hook it into something that's local to you, isn't it?
Yeah,
absolutely.
So it's, you know, if it's a story about someone you don't know, you might not remember. If it's a story about Betty who lives down the road, you're never going to forget.
Yeah.
It's fascinating how they travel.
Fascinating. And there's an extra layer in Ireland, because up to my mother's generation, people often had to leave, including my mother. So, you know, hence I was born in Birmingham, you know. So they put a great store on having stories in the place that your heart wanted to go back to, you know. So yeah,
my mum always said she was going home when she went to visit my nana was from Kilkenny, my nana and my gran, and my mum always talked about going home. It was called home. Visit. So it's funny, isn't it? You never quite move on. So shall I share my story?
Yes, please.
First time that Frankie held out his giant fisherman's paw of a hand to Eileen, she put her little delicate hand into his, and they just fitted together like pieces of wood in a well-made dovetailed joint. And this shock of electricity ran through her, and her eyes opened wide, and she looked into his eyes, and they just knew, as you do. And he led her down to the dance floor, and Frankie and Eileen had their first dance together. And I'm going to sound quite corny now, but it was as if the rest of the world disappeared and the two of them were just there together, whirling around and around. And then the music finished, and they had to go off and dance with other people and pretend that they hadn't just met the love of their life. But now and again they would come back together, and you could almost see the sparks of electricity fly as their hands touched. Well, this went on for several weeks, and they thought they were being very discreet, but the rest of the room, they just smiled every time they saw the two of them come together. And it came as absolutely no surprise, but a source of enormous delight for everyone when the banns were read for Frankie and Eileen. They were made for each other. And the wedding. The wedding. Where do I start? It was the best ceilidh the island had ever seen. The whole island came together and they danced to the notes of the fiddle and the flute all through that night. And they danced and danced as the stars wheeled across the heavens. And then the sun came up, and Frankie and Eileen made their way home to their own little cottage to start their married life together. And they were so happy, so contented. Their life fell into a happy little routine. Every morning, Frankie would go to his little ship, his little boat, and he would set sail across the sea, and she would wave him off as he disappeared off across the horizon. And then Eileen would go home and she would do all of those jobs that we women do that nobody knows about. She just got on with making their life as positive and as wonderful as possible. And then in the afternoon, she would pick up a shawl and she'd wrap it around her shoulders and she would go and wait for him on the beach. And some of the other young wives were there too. And they'd exchange laughter and gossip, and they'd wait until they could see the mast of their husbands' boats coming back across the sea. He would pick her up and he would swing around and he would kiss her. And then they would walk hand in hand back to their little cottage and they would have their supper together and go out for a walk along the shore, maybe, making plans. It wasn't the most exciting marriage or exciting life, but it was just, such contentedness. And they started to make their plans for the future. Children, maybe. But this is a story, isn't it? So, things are not going to go smoothly for very long. And one afternoon, the sea was very squally indeed, and the wind was beating onto the shore, and Eileen made her way down to the shore, and she waited for Frankie. And one by one, all of the other husbands came back, and Frankie didn't appear. And it got cold. And people waited with her for a little while, and then she was on her own, and she pulled a shawl tighter around her shoulders, and she stared out to the horizon, and she waited for her husband to return. And the sky grew dark, and Frankie did not return. She made her way up onto the little headland, the little hill, and she looked out as far as she could, and still there was no sign. Well, the next morning, the whole of the island came together, and between them they combed every single little beach all around the island. But it had to be her that found him, didn't it? She ran down the shingle beach, and she fell to her knees at his side, and the stones bit into her legs. And she held up his hand, that big fisherman's paw. And it was cold now. And she looked into those blue eyes that had always held a twinkle just for her. And they just stared up at the heavens. And he had seaweed tangled in his beard. If you'd been there and you'd been stood close enough, I think you'd have heard the crack as Eileen's heart broke. Well, they came and they took him off the beach. And the next day, Frankie was buried, with his feet facing out to sea, like a good fisherman. Eileen had to get on with the rest of her life. But it was as if something had been snuffed out in her. A light was gone, and the life had gone out of her. She carried on. She carried on with life as best she could. She was a good girl. She looked after her mum and her younger brothers and sisters, and she tried to continue. She even tried going to the dances every weekend in the little village hall, and people would ask her to dance at first, and then after a while they stopped asking, and Eileen became one of the ladies that sat and watched. But every evening she would pick up a shawl and she would wrap it around her shoulders and she would walk along the shore, and she couldn't help it. No matter how foolish she knew it was, she kept looking out to sea as if she could wait for his boat to come back. And the weeks turned to months, and the circle of the year turned, and Eileen began to fade away. The nights grew cold and dark, and the days grew short, and soon it was October, and as October wound its way towards November, Eileen perked up. She'd heard a rumour, and she knew it was foolishness, and she knew she shouldn't believe it, but she couldn't help herself. She'd heard a rumour that on Halloween, all of the dead of the island, they had a ceilidh. And as Halloween approached, she went out. And the sky was as black as velvet, and the stars were prickling the sky as she put a shawl around her shoulders and she walked up that little headland, and she sat on a tussock of grass at the top of the hill. And she waited. And it grew cold. She could see her breath hanging in the air around her. And soon the moon rose. And then she heard it. She heard the sounds of a ceilidh. She could hear the flute. She could hear the fiddle. She picked herself up. She walked further up to the top of the hill. She looked down into a little valley. And there they were. All the dead of the island. They were having a ceilidh. Oh, my goodness, they were having a whale of a time. All these pale ghosts, arm in arm, stripping the willow, dancing for all they were worth. There was laughter and smiles and people whirling each other round in the moonlight. Everyone was having a wonderful time. Everyone. Except Frankie. She could see him. He was stood on the edge of the crowd with his hands in his pockets, looking around, wondering what to do with himself. And she realised it was because he didn't have a partner. Well, she picked up her skirts and she ran down that hill, and she flung herself into Frankie's arms, and he picked her up and he swung around and he kissed her. Eileen, he said, what are you doing here? Well, she put her hands on her hips. Frankie, she said, I've come to dance. And he laughed. And he held out his big fisherman's paw, and she put her delicate little hand into his and fitted together so perfectly. And they began to dance. And it was as if the rest of the world disappeared and just the two of them were there. They only had eyes for each other. But the music always has to end, doesn't it? And when it did, he held her away from him and he said, Eileen, you can't be here. This is not where you belong. She said, Frankie, I belong with you. Well, that was it. He couldn't resist. Off they were again, and they danced to jigs and reels, and the stars wheeled across the sky, and the two of them were just in each other's arms for the whole evening, and all the pale spectres slid around them. But soon the sun began to rise, and as it did, the stars began to fade, and so did the ghosts. And she watched as her beloved Frankie faded away to nothing. She made her way back up the hill. She walked along the shore. She went to her mother's house and she threw herself down on the bed, and she was as white as a ghost, a sea salt sprayed dress. Cold she was. But before long she was burning up. And the fever built over the next day, and they sent for the doctor, but nothing could be done. And they sent for the wise woman, but still nothing could be done. But just as the moon was rising, she seemed to perk up, and as if she could hear music somewhere. I'm coming, she said. Wait for me, Frankie. But in the morning, she was gone. And although Eileen is now buried next to her beloved Frankie, with her feet facing out to sea like a good fisherman's wife, when they talk about her, they don't say Eileen's passed away. They say, oh, Eileen. Yeah, she's off dancing with Frankie. She always did love dancing with her Frankie.
Oh, it's as good as ever it was. It's like your favourite song on the radio when it comes on, Maria.
Yeah.
You know,
It's just such a lovely tale, isn't it?
Yeah. Do you see every picture in your mind's eye?
I do, very much so, yeah. So somebody was asking me the other day how you can remember how to tell stories. I was like, I just tell what I see, really.
Yeah, same.
I do. Yeah.
And I remember...
It's like this, which is completely mind-blowing. Some people don't see images, do they?
I know. It's absolutely mad, you know. We've met some of those storytellers now, you know. But I remember when I was back in the corporate world, that a man came in one time and he said, I'm just going to say one word to you. And the word is chair. And we went right around the circle. And when he came to me, I said, oh, big pink chair, and there's a shaft of sunlight coming in, and it's so big that your whole body is cozied up in the corner of it, you know. And my boss was like, what? You know? And then they came to my boss, and my boss said, letters about so high, 1 meter, black, CHAIR. And the two of us were like, lost for words.
It's weird, isn't it?
Yeah, you know.
We think we understand everybody because we understand how people think, and we don't really.
We don't.
There's nothing guaranteed there at all, is there?
Yeah, you know. So, like, I've carried out that experiment a lot with people since, and we did it in Logitech when I was recently there for the summit, and every single person in the circle was visual. So I've never met anyone like my ex-boss ever again after that. He was so in logic, you know. He lived in the logical world. So I think I'm the total opposite of that. I live in the internal world.
I don't even understand how that could evolve, because we evolve as we evolve as visual creatures, don't we? So that's
There's actually a medical term for that. I don't remember what it is, but it's unusual enough that there's some people who just can't create images. Yeah.
That's it. But like, it's outside of the medical, I think it's the paradigm. I think all of those are necessary and valuable, you know. And we have one colleague, Alistair, and he builds worlds. He builds them as he's telling you the story, because he doesn't see the worlds. And that was like, to be with Alistair going through that process was incredible. And I felt gave an extra dimension to my stories, because now they were being built in space as well as being built behind my eyes, you know. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, really interesting.
And one entirely different reaction to this. I love the story, of course. But you may not know, Maria, I'm a death doula, and I'm with people who are either at the end of their own lives or are accompanying a beloved in that journey. And there's a great truth to those. There are many truths, but one of them is that most people end up choosing the timing of their departure one way or another. And that resonated with me very deeply in this story. And it's not to say that that's always the right thing to do. We can't judge that. I guess that's the right way to say it. We can't judge that. But
I have a question for you then, as a death doula, because one of the things I would really like to do, and I don't know if I'm up to it or not yet, is to go into hospices and to share stories in hospices, because I think the distraction, if nothing else, you know, just the kind of, it's a community thing, isn't it, and a distraction. But I'm thinking about a lot of the stories that I know, that some of my most beloved stories involve death in some way or other, or involve ghost, and I don't know whether it's an appropriate place.
Absolutely.
Absolutely it is.
We have it's not formally a hospice, but we have a home for people who are leaving, and I'm their storyteller. I come in and I both tell and listen to stories there. And I don't want this to sound too self-promoting, but I have a whole book of stories for the end of life called Stories from the Heart. Stories at that time are a wonderful way to listen to people, because as storytellers, we know we're listening as we're telling. And by sitting down and even just telling a short story, the person we're engaged with knows we're listening to them and are going to be ready to listen to what they have to say to us. And wonderful things happen. So I would encourage you. I would encourage you.
And, you know, I suppose we've just always done it because it's part of the Irish wake, you know, to recall the stories and the memories and stuff like that. But when I went to Maynooth to train as a drama therapist, we put names on some of that stuff. And one of the names that was put on it was the liminal space. So the Irish name on that is the idder, the in-between, you know. So so it was so familiar to me. With my own mom, and I've often told stories to people that are dying, and there's like a magical space that opens up that can't be explained. I won't even try to put words on it. But with my mom, she'd ask me for the stories that she'd told me in the last weeks. You know, she'd go, tell me the one again about the chicken leg, which is a story about her when she was young. Or she'd go, what's your Nancy May now? Knowing that my Nancy May, even though it was received from her, was different from hers. And I remember we slept on a little pallet bed next to her bed because we knew, you know, kind of what was going to be coming. And I remember getting up one day and getting out of my, it was coming up to Christmas, so getting out of my Christmas pajamas and putting on my trousers and my top. And she said, where are you going? And I said, Mom, I think I might go to Cork Yarn Spinners just for an hour and then I'll be back and I'll sleep here with you tonight, you know. And she said, come here. And I went and she caught me by the two hands, you know, and she looked into my face and she said, you can tell my stories now. And I was like, oh my God, like, you know, I knew when she was giving me her stories willingly, she wouldn't be telling them again. You know?
That's such a gift. That's so lovely.
Yeah. So like, keep that sentence in your head, Maria. That was such a gift.
Yeah.
And that's what you're being called for from your belly right now.
Yeah, I that was the only thing I was one, am I going to be able to do it without going to pieces? Because I get very emotionally involved and I don't want to be a burden snivelling wreck, you know. And two, do people want to hear stories about death? Is it going to be something they're a little bit scared to think about, or is it going to be a nice opportunity to open up a conversation?
Well, I tell you what my mammy told me. She said, you know when you're there, you know when you'll know, and you'll feel the red thread. So the red thread for us was always the red thread of story.
Yeah.
So we try to intellectualize it and say, in that situation now, this could be my reaction. You'll never know until you're there.
Yeah,
and the story,
you'll kind of feel it with your belly, I suppose, won't you? Really? Yeah.
And the stories are a seat. The stories are a seat that you sit into and they hold you up and you will know the right story to tell. And sometimes it will be the Eileen story and sometimes it'll be something completely different and you'll know.
And many times it might be a story that has nothing to do with death as far as you can figure, but it's a story that needs to be told in that moment.
Yeah.
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 I am very conscious of the fact that we have had this wonderful exchange for well over an hour already.
Oh, it doesn't feel like it,
It doesn't feel like it. But I want to thank you, Maria, for visiting us today to be our inaugural guest from Cork to New York. And
I'm very honoured.
Yeah, and what a treat and a pleasure and an honor it is to have you here. I can't wait to meet you in person.
Thank you very much honestly, it's been the best Friday afternoon. We're recording on a Friday afternoon. This is just the best way to spend a Friday afternoon.
The best way.
That has gone so quickly as well. I've really enjoyed that. Very relaxing listening, really. Thank you.
Will we say goodbye from Cork?
And goodbye from New York, but only for a while, because we'll be back again with another episode. Absolutely.
We can't wait to see you on the Story Road one more time. And from this time till that, be safe on the Story Road.